I want to talk to you about recommendations, audit recommendations that may be included in an audit report. So the auditor does their audit, they find some issues what they can consider to be control deficiencies that in their opinion represent a risk to the organization. Perhaps it's high, perhaps it's not, but they will issue recommendations. They will come up with recommendations to correct that. Now, as my friend Tracy has recently posted on LinkedIn summarizing the results of some of her training, sometimes those recommendations are not the result of doing a full root cause analysis, and therefore you haven't really got down to the underlying problem, and therefore there's more, she calls them recommendations, that could be issued, which will actually correct the cause, not just the symptom. Anyway, but these are still recommendations. Now, when I became an auditor many years ago, and I remember an internal audit with a financial services institution, I was not the head of internal audit, so I was not dictating how we worked. But the style back then was to press forward and issue the audit report, and the typical metric in the profession was to try and get it done within 7 days of completing the field work. That was a metric indicating some kind of quality internal auditing. The trouble was that management would then issue a memo or an email response, which would come in sometime afterwards, and then the auditor would get that. It would also presumably go to management, to senior management and possibly the board, but they would get it and they would try to understand, why was this so different from the recommendation that we made? Because it wasn't always exactly we will do what internal audit has suggested. Sometimes it was a little bit different. Sometimes the auditor, I remember doing this myself, would feel they haven't really addressed the problem. So over time this transformed into the auditor asking for a recommendation to come back to the draft, and then they would include the response below the recommendation. And then the auditor would try, like I said, to reconcile the response to the recommendation and go back and perhaps negotiate with management to come up with something that was in sync, it was in line, so that management was doing what internal audit felt needed to be done. But you still had a recommendation and a response. Now let's look at that from the point of view of top management and the board. They see a recommendation, they see a response, and they say, why are these two people not working together? And why does this look different? Why does the recommendation look a little bit different from the response? I'm not sure that they're working together. I'm not sure that the issue is being properly addressed. How can I get confidence that they're being addressed properly? So when I became the head of internal audit, I said, this is not the way to go forward. What we need to do is recognize a couple of things. First of all, we need to provide our customer with the information they need. And that means don't make them work to try and reconcile the recommendation and response. Tell them what's going to be done and tell them whether we agree with that. So let's move to sitting down and working with management, agree upon the facts, discuss and agree upon the implications, what the level of risk is, especially understanding the root cause and what really needs to be done. And then once we agree upon what needs to be done, to the point where management agrees that this is something that needs to be done, and so they can own the action, then we will report not a recommendation response, but an agreed action item. This is moving to a different level. This is providing management, senior management, and the board with information that is very clear as to what needs to be done, and that both management and internal audit agree that this is the right thing to do. We're not trying to, and I've seen this sometimes, I've seen this even in some of the posts of Richard Chambers. The audit report is not there to persuade anybody to do something. It's really an ineffective tool for persuading anybody to get something done. You want to sit down and negotiate and talk to them and agree. Get to the point where management not only agrees but recognizes the value to them of making the change, so they will own it, and therefore it will actually be done, not just recommended or scheduled. It'll actually be done. So agreed upon action items, so much better. The other thing we need to do is recognize that sometimes we don't have the answer. We are actually not. We may be the experts in internal control. We may be the experts in analyzing and assessing risks in a process. But the people running the business should be the experts in running the business. They should be the experts in understanding what the process needs to do and where the trade-off is between the cost of a control and the value of a control. And maybe even better ways to do a control. They have better understanding than we do most of the time. So why are we telling them what to do? Are we in a situation where this is like your family coming and telling you how to raise your child? We resent that because we know that child better than they do. We know what works, we know what doesn't work. Now maybe we will talk to them, and if we're smart, we'll dive into their experience and their knowledge and see if they can help us with some ideas as what they have found as will work, and add that to what we know will work. But when it comes to raising our child, we probably know better than our parents or our uncles and aunts and cousins what will work to raising that particular child. And it's the same thing in business. We as auditors don't necessarily know what is the best solution when there's a control issue. We should be sitting down with management to agree upon whether the risk is serious enough to merit action, and then talk about what could be done so that management, like I said, owns it, but they're also sharing their knowledge and insight into what could be done, and certainly helping us understand what the true risk is. So I strongly urge everybody, and Tracy tells me that more than 2/3 of the audit reports that she sees as an expert and as a consultant on audit report writing, more than 2/3 of them still include findings and recommendations. Let's move instead to recognizing the value is not in the recommendation. The value is in the action. The value is in what is actually done as a result of our sharing our insight and advice and talking and working through to come up with the correct value add action to improve processes and controls and to achieve objectives. Oh, and by the way, let's also get away from the point of view that the executive summary is just a list of findings. It's another thing she just told me. She often finds that the executive summary is just a list of findings. We need to be stepping back and looking at the whole situation, all the different issues we're finding, and think about, what does this all mean? What does this all mean? Is there a theme here? Is there an overriding problem in the management of this particular area? And maybe we should be thinking instead as to whether management is effective, whether they have the right people, whether they have the right information to do the work, and whether there is something that ties all of these different issues together, and therefore we can come up with greater insight and drive even better corrective actions and process improvement and control improvement. Anyways, I encourage you all to step back and think about, she thinks it's going to take courage. I don't think it's going to take so much courage, but change from issuing recommendations to working with management to agree upon corrective actions, and then reporting that to executive management, to the board, and saying these are the actions that we and the management have agreed will address the problem. You'll make not only your life easier because management will embrace this, they will recognize that you're not their second cousin telling them how to raise their child anymore. They won't see you as being an arrogant twit that doesn't understand the business but thinks you know better than they do. Instead, you're the collaborator, you're the consultant there to help them be effective, help them to be successful. So I hope this is useful to you. If you'd like to comment on this, please do so. Happy to chat if you would like to contact me directly. Thank you.